and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome to Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs with me, Jamie Franklin. And today, joining me, I'm very pleased to have back in the studio of a sort, I suppose, Daniel French. Daniel, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm fine, Jamie.
Yes.
I'm still buzzing from last week where we met in person.
We did.
And had that amazing conference in Cambridge, which filled, I think, us with energy and hope for the future.
Indeed.
Lots of young Anglican movers and shakers, big thinkers gathering with us and a few others to consider how we raise the next generation of Christians.
Yes.
I just thought it was a real powerhouse experience.
Yep.
I'm still kind of having a nice kind of fuzzy kind of feeling from it.
Fizzy, fuzzy feeling. Yes, I too have a fizzy, fuzzy feeling. I really enjoyed it. It was great. It was great to meet you in person. People may have seen the tweet we did of you, me. It wasn't just you and me. Tom was there as well.
Yes.
And it was the three of us really just having a great time in Cambridge. I love Cambridge. It's a fantastic city. And it was brilliant to be there.
I have to say, I slightly chuckled when he came through the door into the conference room. He's so tall.
He's massive. He's absolutely freakish. He's a freakishly large individual. I think he's 6'6".
BFG.
Yeah. He is a bit like a BFG, isn't he? Because he is very gentle as well.
Looking down at us humans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Daniel, that was an awesome time. So really exciting thing is, I should say, the tickets for our live event, Irreverent Face to Face, that is happening on May the 7th this year, not next year, this year, 2022. That is happening on May the 7th, and tickets are available from Saturday, the 26th of March. Saturday, the 26th of March. I believe they're priced at £25, which may seem like...
How do people get to find that link?
Yes, indeed. Well, that link for the Eventbrite will be in the show notes on YouTube or on your podcast. You can find that, and I will, of course, put it on Telegram and on our Patreon account as well, and I'll tweet it out. But the thing is, Daniel, these tickets are limited. I think the capacity, we're not actually certain of the capacity. I think it's 80, but we're going to have to hold some back for, certain people who will need to be there. So the tickets are going to be reasonably limited, probably to 70. So it's not a lot. It's not a lot. Lots of people listen to this and many people want to go. So if you want to go and you don't want to be disappointed, go to the Eventbrite link in the show notes and book right now. Now, £25, I know it might seem a lot, but the place we're renting is a lovely place. I think it's called, what's it called? It's in Spitalfields. It's the kind of thing I should have found out and memorized before I did this notice. But anyway, it's a great place in Spitalfields. It's a really nice hall. It's got a coffee bar there and everything. We're going to be there all day. It's going to be a fantastic opportunity to have coffee together, to chat, to meet people, to listen to interesting people, including us, of course, Daniel. But we have got some guests lined up. And I think it's all right.
That was my next question. I know.
Yeah. What's your question?
Hey, who are the guests?
Well, who are the guests? Well, I know for a fact that Laura Dosworth is coming. So that's good. Now, we're able to say also the guests you've lined up, aren't we? Is that right?
Yes, yep. Calvin Robinson.
So Calvin Robinson is going to be there as well. And Dick Dellingpole is going to be coming to talk about Thursday Circle and what it's like to be running that. And he's going to be sharing his amusing and hilarious thoughts, I'm sure. And I've also asked Dominique Jenner to come as well, who's she's a writer. Well, she's a mother and she's a writer for The Conservative Woman. She's just written a really good piece that she shared with me on coming to terms with the last couple of years. So I think it'll be great to have her come and reflect from her perspective as an intelligent and interesting person, but somebody who also has a very normal life as well. So we got those four people. There may be more. I don't know, but that's what we've got at a minimum. So
25 quid is a bargain.
25 quid, I think, is a reasonable price. We do have to cover our overhead. So people are saying, why do you need the 25 quid? It's because it costs money to get the hall, and we'll have to pay expenses and stuff like that. So really it's to cover the cost of the event.
And if people are thinking now about timings, how much of the day is it?
It's all day. So we're starting at 10 o'clock. We've got the venue until 5:30. So there'll be a break for lunch where people can go and get their own lunch because we won't have any catering there. But there is a coffee bar. So we'll have time, lots of time for meet and greets and chats and all that kind of stuff. So all day long, starting at 10. So it's not horrendously early in London. So we really hope that people can come. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it?
I was thinking, I'll try and think of some interesting games or something that we can play. We've done the Irreverend Awards, haven't we? We can't really do that again, but maybe a variation on that. But anyway, that's going to be a fantastic event. Really, really looking forward to it. The weather.
The only thing is, it's a shame it's not May the 4th, because then we could have had a Star Wars.
We could have had a Star Wars themed Irreverend event.
Yeah.
So the sun is so bright here; it's actually shining on the side of my head and almost obliterating me here. It's crazy how this weather has changed. One more shout out. Pusey House Theological Conference 2022. Father George Westhaver, who's the principal there, asked me to do a little plug because he's a fan of the show, Daniel. He loves this show. He listens to it with his wife. Pusey House.
We met him last week.
Yeah, for sure. We met him last week. He was there at our thing. He'd just like me to do a plug for the Theological Conference, Pusey House, July 4th, which is called Descent of the Dove, Knowing and Loving in Spirit and Truth, Pusey House Theological Conference, which is from 4th of July to Monday, 4th of July to Wednesday, 6th of July. And listen to this rostrum of speakers: Lewis Ayres, Richard Conrad, Susan Gillingham, Malcolm Geit, Carol Hallison, Karen Kilby, Matthew Levering, Jav Leveson, Andrew Luth, John McGuckin, Oliver O'Donovan, Marcus Pleston, Graham Tomlin, Robin Ward, Callistos Ware, Robin Williams, Judith Wolfe, who is a total legend, by the way, and N.T. Wright. So if you want to go to a conference with all of those people speaking, then you can just go to Pusey House on Monday, July 4th. And I'll stick a link to that in the show notes as well. That's for people who are into theology, Anglicanism, Anglo-Catholicism, anything to do with any of those speakers.
Theological bonanza, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I would go, but it's around the time that my wife is due with child number 4, so I can't go to that. But I do seriously recommend it. Pusey House is a lovely place, by the way. If you don't know it, it's in the heart of Oxford, and it's a real bastion of Anglo-Catholic orthodoxy. I'm sure Tom would add, if there is such a thing, if he were here, but he's not. So he's not here to shipwreck our theological orthodoxy with his Protestant banality. Only a joke. We love Protestant. We're Protestants. I'm a Protestant of a sort, as are you, Daniel. That's what it is.
Protesting all the time.
I'm always protesting. I do apologize. I don't want to in any way alienate the Protestant faction of our audience. It's not even a faction. It's probably the vast majority of Protestants. So I do apologize. I don't want to alienate anyone at all. Right. So speaking of being a Protestant, let's look at scripture, shall we? We're going to talk about now. We're going to we committed, perhaps in a foolhardy way, to going through the whole of Revelation before we die, and we've got to Revelation chapter 6. And now, really, so I've been doing a bit of reading on this because this is where the book starts to go a little bit crazy. So how's this to help people out? We've done chapters 1 to 5, which you could say is about the sort of present state of things, right? So you've got the letters all at the beginning, vision of Christ and so on. And then you've got the heavenly worship. So let's say that's when John is writing it, that's what's happening in the contemporary world. Now, this section here from chapter 6 to all the way to chapter 18 is referring to a future point in human history that appears to precede the end of history. Now, as we've talked about before, all of these events in Revelation, they're always happening all the way through history. So in a minute, we're going to talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But it does seem to be talking about, in these chapters in particular, events that precede the very end of history. Chapter 19, Jesus returns. And then chapters 20 to 22, that's talking about the eschatological vision of the new heavens and the new earth, really the end of history, the sort of fulfillment of history. So that's a little bit about this, where this chapter comes in. I wanted to say, Daniel, a bit about views of history, because I think this could be helpful for people. The Christian view of the shape of history is a little bit complicated, right? Because you can get a kind of cyclical view of history, which is like a Greek view, I think, is like that. It's sort of a golden age and then going around into a bronze age and so on, and then back to a golden age. So that's kind of cyclical view of history. You can have a view of history, which is history is going up and down, just getting better and worse, perhaps, not particularly kind of ordered or, not in an ordered or directed way. You can have a progressive view of history, which is that history is just getting better all the time. Liberal views of history tend to be that way. They date, in the sort of classic view of history and modernity, sort of liberal modernity would say that it's that progression starts in the 17th century, and we're moving in the right direction all the time. And you can have the opposite as well, which is a digressive view of history, where history is just getting worse and worse and worse. And maybe much of our listenership actually share that view of history, that things are just going down and down and down into the toilet. The Christian view, or at least the eschatological view, which means the view, about the very end, is that there will be a decline, a serious period of some kind of major disaster for the world. So history will be sort of going along. I would say it's sort of going up and down, really. And then Revelation appears to talk about a period of decline, serious decline, like catastrophic decline, and then the return of Christ. And then, if you like, a kind of progression upwards, or kind of straight upwards, exponential growth of goodness at the end of the book of Revelation. The interesting thing about this is that it's actually very similar to the Marxist view of history as well, because Marx, of course, was influenced by the Judeo-Christian tradition. So in the Marxist view, you've again got this situation where, well, I suppose you would say that things are on the whole pretty bad, and then you have a revolution which is going to involve violence and bloodshed and so on. But then after that, once you get the dictatorship of the proletariat, once they've overthrown the bourgeoisie, then things start to improve, and then you eventually move up towards this kind of utopian situation where there's the need for the dictatorship has been surpassed, and everyone, there's that famous passage in Marx about how everyone will be fishing and doing literary criticism and et cetera, et cetera. It's like the famous passage in Marx where he doesn't really explain where all the fishing equipment is going to come from, or who's going to produce, which publishing houses are actually going to be operating to produce these books, to do these literary criticism. But that's his kind of vision of reality.
It's a kind of it's a perpetual Sunday afternoon, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel when I watch something like Downton Abbey. I think, well, it'd be great if I could, if everyone could live like these English aristocrats. But
unless you're downstairs.
Yeah, unless you're downstairs. But even that, Daniel, I just find it also romantic. Anyway, no, it was probably very, very hard work for those servants. So that's just a bit about the kind of shape of history and the way I see Revelation fitting into it. The thing I read, very, very helpful comment on Revelation, which is that the purpose of it can be summarized in chapter 2, verse 25, where Christ says to one of the churches, which is the church in Thyatira, hold fast what you have until I come. Hold fast what you have till I come. And in many ways, that's a kind of summary of this whole book, is that some crazy stuff is going to happen in history. I mean, I suppose it applies to our lives as well. Crazy stuff is going to happen, and difficult stuff and terrible things. But hold fast until I come, because Christ is coming, and that's one of the consistent messages all the way through the book of Revelation.
And for our listeners, the context of crazy things happening goes right back to the beginning of the scripture, with our rebellion from God, with what we call the fall, with our wanting to create lives and communities without any access or reference to God.
Yeah, indeed.
And then, as if you want to get more sort of spookily cosmic, it's the sort of demonic invasion into that, which aggravates that and makes that 10 times worse.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And at the book of Revelation, we see the sort of wrapping up, the final act, if you like, of this great cosmic battle between light and darkness, good and evil. I thought what we could do is we could just read the first 8 verses, which are about the famous 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That phrase actually comes from a wood carving by Albrecht Dürer called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I've shared it in the show notes, Daniel, for your delectation, but it's a rather frightening image of the 4 horsemen described here. Let's read the passage. Do you feel like you could read it, Daniel?
So, give it a go. So, from the 6th chapter, verse 1. Then I saw the Lamb open one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out as with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow, a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature call out, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people would slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine." When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4 living creatures call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over a 4th of the earth, to kill with sword, famine, and pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth.
Thank you. Yes. Have you ever? Do you know? Did you ever hear the song "The Man Comes Around" by Johnny Cash?
No.
Well, it's Cash reads out from, I think it's from the KJV, verse 8 of that passage before it starts, and in his sort of aged baritone drawl, and it's quite something. Anyway, so we've got these 4 horsemen here. Now, it seems to me, and I'm not an expert with Revelation, I'm just trying to sort of learn what I can about it, but it seems to me that this is talking about chronological events that happen, in this period of time that we've been discussing. And there are sort of 3 sequences of 7 things that happen. So there are the 7 seals, the 7 bowls, I think, come next, and then the 7 trumpets. And here you've got the first 4 seals, which are spoken of as horsemen. So you've got the first one, which is the white horse with its rider and its bow. Crown was given to him, and he went out conquering to conquer. It's interesting. There is a division particularly in the Church Fathers about this, because there are some who say that this is an image of the victory of the gospel. It seems to me far more likely that this is consistent with the other images, and that this is talking about some kind of war machine, some kind of conquering horseman, an overwhelmingly powerful military force. And it's amazing how relevant all this stuff is. So you've got that, then you've got the second one, which is a bright red horse, which its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that men should slay one another. Again, so relevant to what is going on nowadays. The third living creature is a black horse, and its rider has a balance in its hands, and it's making this. It's basically talking about a famine. Mm. So the balance in his hand suggests a scarcity of food. He's basically saying, food is going to be really, really expensive. Again, so it's so relevant, isn't it? We see all of this in our world today. And then the 4th seal, I mean, not only in our world today, but right now in our own nation. And then the 4th seal is a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. And this is depicting a pestilence, a disease, which has the power to wipe out. Well, that together they're given the power to wipe out a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword and with famine, with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. So it's amazing how Scripture speaks so clearly to our time.
I think Jonathan Pajot, in one of his recent YouTubes, has described how the Horsemen are the pattern for what global systemic breakdown would look like.
Yes.
That this isn't just a fanciful collection of disasters. That if you think about it, this is probably how things would follow, knowing human folly and bad government. And
so meaning you would get war first, then you would get scarcity, then you would get pestilence, because disease would arise and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
This is how it stacks up, and clearly in this instance, this is a horrific stacking up. This is about as bad as you can get, where a quarter of the population perish.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to me that this is one of these aspects of the book of Revelation where you can say, well, this stuff is all happening all the time, and maybe it's kind of intensifying at the moment, but it does really seem to be describing something that is a definite historical event. That seems to be very specific, doesn't it? That they were given a power over the fourth of the earth, so that hasn't happened yet. And it might be that I sort of see them as kind of foreshadowings of these events, these wars and rumors of wars, and viruses and pestilences and rumors of viruses and pestilences, and shortages, famines, and all this kind of stuff. I think it feels particularly, maybe it's just because we live in the developed world, or whatever you want to call it, the Western world, but when it starts hitting the Western world, it starts to feel more apocalyptic, if you know what I mean.
Well, we've had 75 years really in Europe and in America and the developed world without much trouble, really.
Yeah.
My grandmother, who grew up in occupied Brussels for 6 years of her teenage life, could describe very well what starvation feels like.
Yeah.
What going to bed in the morning, in the evening, and not knowing if there's going to be bread in the morning is a shocking thing to take with you, or to hear even Allied planes going over, knowing they're bombing the city, and knowing that in the chaos you may perish.
Yeah. Even
when the good are trying to get rid of the bad, as collateral to that. So we've not had that. And so I think that makes 2.5 generations quite shocked by the existential crisis that brings. And we have the extraordinary situation now of having got out of COVID and probably thinking in January, a lot of people think, oh, well, that's the worst of it.
Mm.
And now we've got this horror show playing out in Eastern Europe.
Yeah. And increasing
could make COVID look minuscule. Disaster.
Yeah. Well, people increasing calls for no-fly zones, for actual military intervention in Ukraine, and sensible voices being shouted down. I've listened to a couple of things with Peter Hitchens, who is imploring people to seek a mediated peace of the situation. And it seems to me that this is, I don't necessarily want to get into all the sort of geopolitical stuff, but this seems to me to be a kind of rational approach, whereas the kind of irrational approach is, well, let's have a no-fly zone, and let's send troops in, and then we can start World War III. So we are living in. But as I say, it's like wars and rumors of wars, isn't it? Because it's like that thing. Who was that person who said history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes? It's so similar to the vibe of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and not exactly the same, but it's a kind of similar vibe, isn't it? It's like, well, we've both got nuclear weapons, and we could do this, and you might do that, and we don't want you to do this, and if you do this, we're gonna nuke you off the face of the earth. and we just about, was it 1973, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we just about managed.
63.
When was it?
63, I think.
Oh, was it 63? Oh, I apologize. I remember seeing that film 13 Days, which is actually a really good film.
I've not seen that. Is that
yeah, it's good. I think it's Kevin Costner in it. It's a good film about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
There's also resonance. I know a lot of people are going about 1939, but there's also resonance with 1914.
Yeah.
Where, well, I'll give you an illustration. I just found today the parish journals from that time, from the vicar.
Yeah.
And
in Salcombe.
Yeah, in Salcombe. Yeah, I just found his parish diary.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, if you look at the years, it starts at 1896, and how things were just plodding along.
Yeah.
And life, all of this seemed completely implausible. And then when you get into the sort of past the summer of 1914, you can see that the horror of what's befalling, and his writing's more stressed.
Yeah.
And I think they never saw it coming.
Yeah.
It is a lesson in history itself. I think Peter Hitchens is right to signal some of this, that we could be seemingly thinking we're doing the right thing and very foolishly walking into absolute disaster.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I sort of feel like, or I think that virtue signaling is going to be the thing that wipes out the whole of humanity. I mean, obviously we've got our own.
Twitter.
Yeah, we've
That's
got our own,
irony, isn't it? One wrong tweet.
Yeah. But it's this thing, isn't it? Well, now because we all have to support Ukraine in this sort of intense, straightforward and dogmatic way, it creates a kind of virtue signaling Olympics. I think is the phrase I've heard. And then the ultimate sort of virtue signaling in this situation is to say, well, let's send military troops into Ukraine, or let's have a no-fly zone, because that makes you look very supportive of the people in Ukraine. And of course, we would want to support anyone, especially civilians, especially women and children who are being killed or endangered because of war. Of course, we would. But that kind of virtue signaling is not taking into account other considerations apart from just me personally looking like I'm being virtuous. And it's very dangerous when lots of people on social media do it en masse, but it's even worse when world leaders are doing it as well. I know Nicola Sturgeon was calling for a no-fly zone. I couldn't name any other significant leaders who were doing it, but it's quite extraordinary.
Goodness, yes. There is an information science to this.
Right.
Again, we could be blind to, and how in the last 10 years with the social media, on the edge of everyone's fingertips with their smartphones, how we can create a kind of dangerous hive mind.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that there needs to be some pullback on that. And what is I find particularly worrying is that there is very few people on the world stage who seem to have nuance or the ability to think laterally. I mean, I'm not to make any kind of particular comment on other countries' world leaders, but or presidents, but I'm not particularly
feeling I know what you're going to say
by Joe Biden.
No, and Kamala Harris.
Cognitive ability.
Yeah. Kamala Harris's assessment of the situation was a big country has invaded a small country, and that's bad. I mean, that was literally the vice president's complete assessment of the situation. It's quite extraordinary. The film that really I think is the best one to watch at the moment is Dr. Strangelove, the Stanley Kubrick film. Have you ever seen?
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've seen little clips on it.
It was genuinely, when I was a teenager, it was about my favorite film. But it's such a funny and brilliant film. It's Peter Sellers at his best. but it's so relevant. I mean, it's not a spoiler to say it ends with the world being blown up by nuclear bombs, but it happens because of the stupidity of the people involved and their inability to communicate basic pieces of information to each other. And it just perfectly lampoons the stupidity and foolishness of world leaders who have got access to these weapons, and they're treating them like they are toys, when they have the capacity to destroy the world multiple times over. So it's Dr. Strangelove, Friday night. You're having a Friday night date night. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's very, very funny. And Peter Sellers is, he plays three characters, and he's his absolute best in that film.
He plays three characters.
Yeah, he plays Merkin Muffley, who's the US president. Not Jack D. Ripper. He plays Jack D. Ripper's assistant, who's this sort of plummy English sergeant who's trying to talk this mad American general who's stolen the nuclear codes out of, doing what he's planning on doing. And then he also plays Dr. Strangelove himself, who's this kind of, this German wheelchair-bound German scientist who appears to be a Nazi who's in America advising the American president, but he can't control one of his arms, which has a black glove on it, and keeps on involuntarily spasming into a Nazi salute. It's comedy genius. I won't do an impression. Now, but it's such a great film. Anyway, but this does segue very.
Moving on from the apocalypse.
Yeah, it does segue very nicely into an article you shared with me this week, which comes from GB News. So we're obviously price of fuel is rising a lot. And this headline says, let me just get it up here, Brits told to work from home 3 days a week and ban cars on Sunday to beat Putin energy crisis. Brits have been told they should cut speed limits and introduce car-free Sundays to fend off the biggest oil shock seen in decades. This advice has been given from the International Energy Agency. They've got a 10-point plan to curb rocketing fuel prices, sparked by Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Ban cars on Sunday in major cities, reduce speed limits, and tell people to work from home more, basically. So Daniel, you shared this on Twitter and with me. What's your concern or thought about this?
Well, there's so many different angles, isn't there? I mean, there's the angle that it comes at that, well, this looks like a fuel lockdown.
Yeah.
If this were serious, I mean, I think this is the International Energy Agency.
Yeah. They're the ones who advise about climate change and stuff like that.
Opposing this. So yeah. I don't know if that has any weight in government or any government, but it sounds like a type of fuel lockdown. And no doubt, with the right technology, you can imagine the sort of dystopian control, can't you? Well, Reverend Franklin, you've used up your carbon your carbon credits this week. I'm afraid you can't go to anything but an essential trip to Sainsbury's. So that there's that control and surveillance sort of under the radar sort of motif in this, but also there was my little sort of own preoccupation with church lockdowns and how we went through. Can you imagine if driving is banned on a Sunday? Well, we then got to transport people to church. Well, or will it come to the phase where we go back to digital church and Zoom church? Mm-hmm. Lord forbid. How would the church argue its corner as an essential service?
Yep.
Because that could potentially hit us quite dramatically once again. And is there enough metal within the church establishment to resist something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very worrying to me. I actually tweeted something. Oh yeah, by Liz Trust. Here it is. Liz Truss said this: the cost that will hit the UK public in soaring fuel prices and a cost of living crisis will be worth it to thwart Putin. And I find that, and that's sort of allied to the fact that both Boris and Biden have said they're going to, Biden's going to ban imports of Russian energy, and Johnson is going to phase out Russian products by the end of this year. And you've got Truss saying this thing about, it will be worth it to thwart Putin. But we know that Johnson has been in Saudi Arabia negotiating with the Saudi Arabian regime, who are, I don't think you could easily make the case that they're morally superior to Putin. And that's not because Putin is some kind of benign individual state. So it's this virtue signaling hypocrisy, which is at the heart of it. And then who are the people who are going, Truss is easy for her to say things like that, but who are the people who are going to suffer a cost of living crisis? Is going to be the elderly and the poor. They're the people who are not going to be able to afford to heat their homes. They're the people who are not going to be able to afford to put their kids in the car and take them to school. So it's just, our political class is all over the place, and it's I don't really know what to say about it. It's absolutely shocking. I don't know what the answer. I mean, I believe part of the answer is to stop this madness about green energy for a start, and start using forms of energy which actually work and which are reasonably cheap. But it's just the way that energy, especially, is being spoken about by our leaders, I think is highly irresponsible. And as you say, Daniel, this is where lots of people fear this is going to go. It's going to become a crisis which has been brought on by the inability of the world leaders, and then it's going to be poor people and ordinary people who will have to stay at home and wrap themselves up in blankets and freeze to death because of the mess they've got us into.
And those who have found in the last 2 years, and today is today the anniversary of the March. We're recording. It's going to come out. This is going to come out March 25th, but we're recording on March 23rd. Yeah, you're right. So, I forgot to mark this. Yeah,
we should have some cake or something.
Yeah, break wind
or bang some pots and pans and applaud the NHS.
It seems like a section of the country got a taste for micromanaging others.
Yep.
Ministers actively encouraged people, to shop your neighbours if you see them breaking social distance rules. The sort of Stasi-esque-ification of the UK. And that worries me, that if we have this kind of war-footing fuel lockdown, those people who've had a lovely taste for this are going to be rubbing their hands with glee at once more micromanaging everything.
Yeah. I wonder as well with this, it's another example. Is it not another example of just this kind of condescending paternalism, right? So fuel prices are going up, and in order to stop that from happening, we can't trust people to use petrol sensibly and to decide when they need to use their cars. We'll tell them when they can use their cars. They can use their cars on Mondays and Wednesdays, and the rest of the time they'll have to stay at home and they'll have to drive at 25 miles an hour on the motorway. And it's just another example, as you say, Daniel, it's another example of this kind of micromanaging, rather than saying to people, look, can you just try and use your car for a sec? I mean, we've already started thinking about in that way, even with the rises that have been so far. Sometimes we would take the car to the shop, which is nearby, because it's quicker to do that. And we're not doing that as much anymore. We walk, because now those short journeys are just so popular, Daniel. So popular. Those short, Daniel's phone ringing all the time, and emails pinging in.
Busy life of a vicar.
Indeed. Well, it shows that you are actually doing your job, doesn't it? Not just making endless podcasts all day. But you know what I mean? You change your habits because fuel is more. That's the way markets work. You don't need to micromanage people's behavior. It will just happen automatically.
No, I totally agree. It's a worrying direction of travel, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, moving on. What should we talk about? Should we talk about transgender swimming or surrogacy?
I'm trying to give it up, really. What a choice.
Yes, well, it's like the generation game. Let's do, which one should we do? Let's do
transgender swimming.
All right, okay, I was going to say surrogacy. Let's do transgender swimming then. All right, so we're just basing this on an article from Spike. So we've got Leah Thomas, who, let's see, the headline says Leah Thomas's victory is a defeat for women's sport. There is nothing fair or inclusive about allowing a male-bodied athlete to compete against women. And we've got a picture of Leah. I thought it was Liz. It's Leah Thomas, who is a transgender athlete, which means that this is a person with a man's body. Women, and you can see that his physique is totally different. So Leah Thomas became the first known transgender athlete to win the highest US national college swimming title on Thursday, with a victory in the women's 500-yard freestyle. Some are hailing her win as a triumph for inclusion, but there is nothing fair or inclusive about allowing Thomas to compete alongside and thrash female swimmers in the women's NCAA championship. So there are a number of things I want to discuss. First talking point here, Daniel. So it says here, according to, is it Ellen Whelan, the journalist here? Yeah. So Thomas has every right to be given the respect and dignity afforded any other member of society when it comes to expressing her identity. But cells, hormones, and muscles don't listen to one's chosen pronouns. Thomas's physical superiority to her fellow competitors stems from being born a male and reaching manhood after puberty. This means she clearly has an unfair advantage over female swimmers. So I guess, Daniel, I want to sort of pick your brains a bit about this first bit where it says Thomas has every right to be given the respect and dignity afforded every other member of society. This was actually something we had a discussion about the other day, wasn't it? The implication being, and throughout this whole piece, Ellen Whelan uses female pronouns and speaks about Thomas as if Thomas were a woman, and is making this distinction between the way that we talk about someone, which she obviously thinks is okay to say, her and she, and that this is a woman and so on, but at the same time to recognize that this person has a male body. And I don't know what your take is on that, Daniel, but I'm profoundly uncomfortable with referring to someone who is a man as a woman in my use of pronouns. I don't know what your take is on that.
Well, Jordan Peterson took that question further, didn't he? Considering when the Canadian law that was going to be introduced or is introduced, compelled, I think, in the name of diversity, that you had to use the gender pronouns that a trans man or trans woman would want you to.
Yeah.
And his infamous response that he would rather go on hunger strike in prison than do so in terms of free speech. So there is that one issue as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
In terms of who owns the pronouns in the end? Is it society, community? If your son decides to become to identify and change gender to become a daughter or a girl, there's, in a sense, what you own of that relationship. They will always be your son.
Yep.
Because that is your, and you to them the father, and you're not going to change to become a woman. You can't suddenly become mother, because that's something that they own of you, rather than these pronouns are not just atomized identities, that they are communally owned, and that seems to be something that is never addressed in this issue.
Yeah.
And there's clearly the dissonance, isn't there? In this particular case, it's really, really highlighted in the pictures. And I think Leah won by quite a margin, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. It doesn't actually say here, but it does say that she, or Thomas, let's say, ranked 554th in the men's freestyle competition when competing as a man, 554th, but won this, thrashed the other competitors.
So there's that dissonance, isn't it, between saying, well, we want between someone like Ella Whelan, the communist here, who is probably more on the sort of conservative side as well. You know, it's not dissing her, but she's trying to be polite in that respect, or genteel at least in accepting the gender identity of Leah, but also acknowledging that Leah has a man's body.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of sometimes step back and think, how did we get to this place? How did we get to this situation?
Yeah.
The maths on this doesn't add up. If you told someone 100 years ago that we were going to be in this situation, they would shake their head in disbelief.
Yeah. So how did we get to this situation? We have abandoned belief in objective reality. I think that's a fundamental aspect of what's happened here. It's a philosophical current that begins really with the Frankfurt School in the early 20th century and comes to us through critical theory, and is radicalized really in the work of people like Jacques Derrida and others, Michel Foucault. And basically what we're left with is this situation, which C.S. Lewis really predicts in The Abolition of Man, where reality is no longer something which is discovered. It is something that's determined by us as individuals. And this is why I won't use the language, because the language is so important. The more that we use this kind of language, the more that we imply and create a situation where this kind of thing can be perpetuated. So that's what. So I'm trying to think, what would people listening to this who don't share my viewpoint would say about this is, well, you're just being you're being transphobic, or you're not being inclusive. And my view is, no, I have a basic philosophical commitment to the idea that there is an objective reality, which is outside of me, it's outside of you, it's outside of Leah Thomas, and it's not something that we can determine for ourselves. It's something that we discover. And biological sex is an example of that. It is not determined by a doctor once somebody has been born. It is discovered. You look at a baby and you see, well, that's obviously a boy, or that's obviously a girl. There may be some very, very marginal and extremely rare cases where there is some ambiguity, but generally speaking, you know what a baby is. And those abnormalities do not establish some kind of norm. They are the exception that proves the rule. So I think philosophically, that's where I'm coming from. So it's not a question of hatred. It's not a question of not being inclusive. It's not a question of not being polite. I mean, genuinely, I think the question about like calling somebody, so Leah Thomas, I think if I met Leah Thomas, I would probably call this person Leah Thomas. But I'm not going to say that this person is a woman or imply that I think this person is, because there is no sense in which this is a woman. I mean, this person hasn't even had gender reassignment surgery. So not that would make any difference, but it just makes the whole thing so absurd. This is literally a person with a man's body in every aspect. The only thing that's different is that this person has chosen to self-identify as a woman. And so for me, it's a kind of radicalization of this view that there is no objectively existing reality. And we shouldn't put up with it, Daniel. This is the thing. We should not put up with this.
Those on the other side of the argument will say, oh, but there's this thing called gender, and that gender is different from biological sex. That they'll push that in your direction, and say that you just haven't understood the problem, that you could be born in a biological sex but have a gendered brain that's different from your and that all of that's very fluid.
Yeah, well, I understand. I mean, I've heard it said by advocates of this position that you can be born with a pink body and a blue brain, or a blue body I mean, this is not somebody unsympathetic. This is somebody advocating the position. I mean, I don't accept this. Let's just put this out. I mean, you've got to be clear about what you're actually saying there. You say, I'm not saying you, but one, is this person saying that the brain itself has some kind of physical gender, because that's clearly nonsense. So it can't be that. So what is it? Is it a kind of feeling, or you almost get into sort of Gnostic territory, don't you, where you're talking about some kind of spiritual component to a human being which is gendered in some way. And
well, I suppose it's, as we've gone down the accentuated individualism, which is very much pertaining to our age. I am my lived experience.
Yes.
You can see how this is a natural progression from that, and that if, my truth is my truth, and it's the truth that I hold. It has nothing really necessarily to do with objectivism, which is seen as Eurocentric, maybe, or patriarchal.
Yeah, it's seen as a reflex of power.
You say, "Oh, you're trying to impose some objective, oppressive truth onto these people." When reality is actually so much more postmodern and diverse and fluid. We can all be who we want to be, which is the Zuckerberg metaverse dream, which is, you could wake up and with, particular hacked brains, we could end up being whoever we want to be in the morning. You want to be a woman one morning, a man, and next, or a dinosaur.
Yeah.
That's your choice.
But you can't be black, can you, Daniel? You wouldn't be allowed to say I'm self-identifying as a black man. That would not be acceptable. But it's interesting, this thing you say about subjectivism. So what I think we can see a progression of ideas here. So we've got this idea that truth is the idea of objective truth, let's say, something oppressive and patriarchal, and that really all it is an instrument of control. And so what we all now have is individual subjective truths, our determination of reality. But we've gone a stage further than that, where people want to take that another step forward and say, actually, it's not acceptable for you to have your truth anymore, because your truth is oppressing my truth. And therefore you can't have it. And you can't use language that's reflective of your view of the world. So my view of the world is that there is such a thing as, there is an objective fact about biological sex, let's say, but that now people like me are being told, well, that makes you a transphobe, it makes you intolerant, a belief that has existed in the vast majority of human beings that have ever lived until about 5 minutes ago. That language now,
when it comes to biological exactism, because what you're putting a claim to, that is not a protected belief system. Yeah,
exactly. So now you can't use that language, and if you do use that language, you are being oppressive. So it's like language has now become a battleground, because it's all it is about power. It's no longer, when it's not about objective reality anymore, it's about power. And that's what the postmodernists said to begin with. It's like you're using language in a way which is oppressive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take control of the production of language, and we're going to tell you what you can and can't say, and that will define reality. And I think that's why we feel this pressure around these kind of issues. It's like you're not even allowed to say it anymore, because that's reflective of a view of reality that's no longer acceptable. It reminds me of Wittgenstein's statements. He said something like, the limits of my language determine the limits of my world. And there is a very real sense in which that is the case, because the language we're allowed to use, or even the language we're allowed to use to think, let alone speak, will determine our view of reality. And so this kind of stuff starts to feel more acceptable as we go along. It's the same kind of thing in the abortion debate. It's, you're not supposed to call an unborn baby a baby. You're supposed to call it a fetus. Why? Because you want to dehumanize it, and you want to marginalize the view that a human life is being taken in an abortion.
It's interesting if you've, for those who've ever been involved in the tragedy of miscarriage, will notice how some healthcare professionals move very quickly from talking about your baby to a product of conception.
Yeah.
And that could be quite chilling. I think a little addition to this is a thought on theology. Is at the moment, I think a lot of the churches are struggling with this, because for a long time now we've given up philosophy as a noble Christian pursuit. So we don't have the tools necessarily to talk about these issues, because they do pertain to some quite deep philosophical questions about who we are and how we act in the world. And I think if you were studying theology, say for ministry, it would be very rare now that you might do a foundational year in philosophy before you even started.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
So I think you find a lot of vicars and ministers, preachers, pastors floundering on this issue because we don't have the philosophical baggage to undergird our theology, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, just to add a further reflection on the kind of moral component of this, you've got a situation where women's sport is being colonized by men, which is not good for women's sport, let's say, which is bad. And I don't say that trivially. I mean, these women athletes have trained very hard to get to where they are, and it's not fair. The rules are not fair. But then you also have situations where you have men in women's prisons, men in inappropriate spaces where women's toilets, where girls are and all this, small girls are and things like this. This is inappropriate. And I can understand why. Was inappropriate, dangerous as well. I can understand why people like J.K. Rowling are upset about this and campaigning against it. It feels very much like an attempt by men to efface womanhood and femininity. And again, it's like this patriarchalist thing. It's all done in the name of liberation. But what actually happens is...
Amazing interview today on Talk Radio with Julia Hartley-Brewer and a Labour MP whose name escapes me, to which at the end she concluded, after he was arguing in this particular instance, for Leah Thomas's case, and that he should certainly keep her prize, whatever gender you want to give her at this moment.
His her.
Sorry.
It's so confusing.
It is. And she said, well, the irony of this is that here are you, a man, telling me, a woman, what a woman is.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and he insofar as that he was saying that this. Oh yeah, Leah Thomas is a woman.
Yeah, Starmer has been clear. A woman is a biological female, and a trans woman
is also a woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, Ellie Whelan puts in here as well the Keir Starmer's comment about how it's not right to say only women have a cervix. I mean, you're absolutely right, Daniel. It seems to me reasonably patriarchal, don't you think, to have a man saying, well, actually, if I decide to, I can be the equivalent to you, Julia Hartley-Brewer, just because I feel that that's the case, or just because I want that to be the case. It's pretty patriarchal.
No, I mean, you could have this bizarre situation where if we realize that if there was some consensus that this was an injustice, do we then change the words? So, okay, we're going to have sports, that this particular football team will be the uterus holders and, football,
the cervix.
Yeah, and the
cervix league.
That Murray wins at Wimbledon for the penis holders. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's kind of
it's I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? So I mean, I think probably we've said enough about that. It is many people foresaw this I mean, I thought this was going to happen. I remember tweeting about it a couple of years ago, that if this carries on, this is the end of women's sport. I mean, just end of story. I can't imagine why anyone like Leah Thomas would take pride in beating women at swimming. I find it I can't get into the mind of somebody who thinks like that. But anyway, I think we've probably said enough about that, Daniel. On to another issue. This is just something I found quite interesting this week.
Having done that hot potato.
Yeah, having done that, and of course, people can leave comments and write in, and tell us where you agree or disagree. That's okay. This is a conversation. So, Dave Rubin, who is he's known as a conservative podcaster in the US, and I actually do listen to his podcast quite regularly, the Rubin Report. And I think Dave Rubin is quite funny. And that's mainly the reason I listen to it, because it genuinely makes me laugh on occasion. He and his partner, his gay partner, have tweeted a picture of themselves out holding ultrasound photographs and a sign reading "Coming soon, baby 1, 8/22/22," which, if I can decode that American dating system, means the 22nd of the 8th month, which is, what's that, July? And then baby number 2. So it's all very Brave New Worldish, isn't it? Baby number 1 and baby number 2. That's coming on the 10th, 10/14/22. So that's October the 14th. Why do they do the numbers like that? It's strange. Anyway, so the point being that Rubin and his partner, I don't actually know what his partner's name is because it's not written here. They have got 2 babies coming through surrogate mothers. And this is interesting because Rubin is held to be a conservative figure in the US. And so people are sort of questioning, in what sense can you be said to be a conservative when you're in a gay marriage and you're paying women to host your babies for you. But then there was another story also that my wife actually drew my attention to, which is about surrogacy in Ukraine. And it was a story on the BBC, a video of surrogate babies who are waiting for their parents in Kiev in a bomb shelter. And it says at least 21 babies born through surrogacy are stuck in a bomb shelter nursery in Kiev. And it's interesting to me because I've never really thought about this issue about surrogacy before. And to be honest, the most I've ever thought about it is probably when I was growing up. There was a storyline in Friends where Phoebe, one of the main characters, people who don't know, acts as a surrogate mother. And she goes through the entire pregnancy and it's a bigger emotional roller coaster. And then it's all resolved with her giving the baby away and it all being a very sort of benign thing. And so in my mind, that's probably the most I've ever thought about surrogacy until quite recently. It's and I've read a bit about it and I watched a couple of YouTube videos on it, and it seems to me an extraordinary ethical minefield here when we're talking about this kind of thing. I mean, I suppose the first thing to say about this Dave Rubin thing is that whatever kind of surrogacy is in mind here, it involves 2 women who will be biologically the mothers of these children. And so for me, there would be a serious ethical question about taking children away from their biological mothers, I assume as soon as they've been born, to give them to a gay couple. And again, Daniel, it's like this patriarchal thing. It's like, these are not entirely your children. And just because you can pay the women to do this, in Dave Rubin's case in the US, presumably, and in the case of these other people, these poor women in Ukraine, it doesn't make them yours. It doesn't extricate their connection from their actual mothers. I don't know what your view is on that.
I think it's one of these darker facets of the consumer culture and particularly of our time. And again, this hyper individualization, and I want what I want, and my truth is my truth. And if I've got it into my head that I can be a parent in this situation who circumnavigates, in this case, clearly, the case for a biological mum, because I want my idealized situation. And in the meantime, I'm going to ignore the cost of that, which will be for this child, presumably, or these children, never to know mum.
Yep.
When baby Rubin, whatever his or her name is, says, who is and where is my mummy? That question is not given, or the answer given is not what we would think normative.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an ethical and it's a pastoral nightmare. I think that's psychologically, I think it's very difficult for that. I can't imagine what it would be like to be that child and to receive an answer to that question, which was, well, we paid for you. We paid for your mother's DNA.
Yeah.
Can't have presumably the answer has to be something along the lines of, you can't have a mum full time or at any time.
Yeah.
I don't know what the arrangements are.
Well, there are complex legal arrangements that precede a surrogacy. So you have to go through, it's like, it's like writing a prenuptial contract or something like that, but it's far more complicated because there are all sorts of things that could happen. For example, the mother could change her mind during pregnancy and not want to give the baby away. There are also, it's fair to say, different kinds of surrogacy. So I forget the technical terms, but there's a straight couple can just use the woman's uterus, and I think they can fertilize they can have the egg and the sperm, they can fertilize outside of the womb, and then it can be implanted. Then there's the kind which Dave Rubin and his partner must be doing, which is not that kind, where it's the sperm is, however I don't know how it works technically, but the sperm goes in and the egg is the woman's. So there is a very clear sense in which the woman is biologically the mother, insofar as she's carrying the child, and it's her DNA as well. So there are different types of surrogacy. There is a moral distinction. It doesn't mean one is okay and the other's not, but and as I say, there are complex arrangements that need to be had. I think as well, another aspect of this is that once a baby's been born, the natural thing is for the baby to be with its mother. It needs its mother, it needs the mother's milk, and it needs the mother's warmth, and all the other stuff that goes on with like a mother's touch and the feel of her body and everything like that. All of that stuff is
and of whom the baby will have heard while in the womb.
Yes, exactly.
And already have one of nature's most profound connections with.
Yeah, exactly. And so to take that baby away from the mother, to give it to a man immediately after it's been born is, well, it's very cruel in my opinion. It's clearly unnatural, but it would be.
We're not qualified to. Obviously, these things can happen by accident. The tragedy of a mother at birth, and a guy heroically trying to bring up the child in the absence of a mother. But what mothers do on the whole is extraordinary.
Yeah, of course it is.
For a child to purposely be designed to have a family unit that purposely says you are not going to have that one agenda. I mean, I know it can work in the same way for dads. If you had two lesbian couples who decided that they were going to have a fatherless family, but I think it's even more acute in this instance.
Yeah, it
The
is.
early years, particularly in the early years.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's one of those things, Daniel, where, I would say that, you can't necessarily make a sort of rigorous philosophical argument for this. I mean, you can talk about it in terms of scripture and what God has revealed to us about the normative pattern of family life and all that kind of stuff. But the biological reality of the necessity of a father and a mother is a pattern and an image of the family, which is a mother, a father, and a child. And from a Christian perspective, I would say that this is the way that God has designed things to function best. This is what marriage is about. It's not just about, marital union and comfort and companionship, as great as those things are, but it's also about providing a context for the raising of children. And the optimal situation, as you say quite rightly, it's not always the situation, but the optimal situation is that a child has a mother and a father. And and again, the idea of paying a woman to operate or to rent her womb, essentially, and for her to go through all of that stuff, the physical, the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual component of pregnancy, and then to give that baby away is profoundly unnatural. There's something profoundly wrong about it.
And considering how many TV shows there are out there at the moment about kids born in the 60s, of which I was one.
Yeah.
Where mother, in a home for naughty girls who get pregnant are told, and I've seen the documents for myself, for my own birth, but within 6 weeks, you have to hand over this child to a couple who will take that little person away from you for the rest of your life because you are not fit and able to. And we lament that and we weep at those stories and we think how tragic and terrible.
Yeah.
And yet, when it comes to surrogacy, somehow the mother's story in this and the obvious is airbrushed out because, again, we have this very plastic idea of truth.
Yeah. And the image of Dave Rubin and his partner with these ultrasound photos, it really speaks of that. You look at it and you think, well, where's the woman? That baby is located. Those babies are located somewhere. They're located in a woman's womb, but she's not in this photo. The only people who are in this photo are two men. And another thought about that as well is, why not adopt a child? There are plenty of children that need adopting, and obviously there's an issue around, there's an ethical question around gay adoption as well. But nevertheless, it's something interesting, isn't it, that you decide you want a surrogate child rather than adopting. I mean, presumably there are lots of children who are made orphans by war and through other very unfortunate circumstances.
Adopting, in Rubin's case, could be a very heroic thing to do because that you're dealing with children maybe who've had trauma. I mean, even in I think in American social services, it's the same in the UK. The backlog is often in teenagers.
Yep.
Because they don't have the cutesy factor.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and they've got the problems.
People want to start, with maybe a baby from scratch, and you can understand that. But there are a lot of kids out there, damaged kids who desperately need a home, and they don't want to be bumped from foster home to foster home. And it's very, very hard for them to get adopted.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where the need is. That's where the need is at the moment.
Yeah, but people like Dave Rubin, I mean, this costs, I think I read that it costs about $500,000 for a child. So, we're talking about a huge amount of money because you have to pay the woman, you have to pay expenses, and they have different laws in the States, depending on which state you're in, but you pay expenses and then you pay the woman to rent the womb. And then, of course, you've got all the legal fees and everything like that. And it's it's the preserve of the rich. Normal people can't do this. It's celebrities like Dave Rubin who can afford it.
I mean, I think, clearly this is going to go ahead.
Yeah.
And one hope that if it goes ahead, that they would have the generosity to be able to adapt their agreement so that the mother can be, at the very least, half time in the child's life.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope so, wouldn't you? I think as well, there's another issue here, and we're running out of time, but I think it's worth saying that we shouldn't, as Christians, who, we may have overlaps with sort of politically conservative viewpoints, but this is an example here of you've got a person who is saying that he's politically conservative, and really what sort of marks him out as a inverted commas conservative is that he's anti-woke. But just because somebody's anti-woke, it doesn't mean that they are, well, firstly, it doesn't mean they're politically conservative. And secondly, it doesn't mean that Christians should therefore look at that person and say, well, that person's on our side or something, or, that person, broadly speaking, shares our viewpoints. Now, I would say, I think Dave Rubin is an anti-woke libertarian, which is different to being a conservative. And it's certainly different to being a Christian conservative because, well, political conservatives want to conserve very important aspects of civilization, like the nuclear family, for example. And he's a man in a gay marriage who's getting surrogate children, paying women to rent their wombs. So that's not politically conservative. It's not. I'm not therefore criticizing it in saying that. I'm just saying it's not politically conservative. It's libertarian because he's saying, we don't need this traditional structure. I should be able to pay this woman to host a child in her womb. She should be free to accept that transaction and nobody should care about it. Whereas that's not a particularly conservative viewpoint.
And I think even if the mother in instances like this genuinely, maybe she's a pal.
Yeah, could be a friend.
I want to do this kind thing for you, and I don't think I'm going to have any feelings of loss or trauma over this. And likewise, she doesn't. That doesn't exclude the possibility that the child will.
Yeah, of course it doesn't.
The child, that makes it doubly worse. Mummy didn't want me.
Yeah, the child is not considered. What's best for the child is not considered here. The other thing as well, just final comment on this, is it just made me realize how influential TV shows like Friends actually are on forming young minds, because it never actually occurred to me that there was any ethical question at all around surrogacy. When I was growing up and watching Friends, I just thought, oh, well, this is kind of an interesting thing. And it's interesting how TV shows like that can normalize practices which are extremely controversial, whichever way you look at it, because it presents it as completely normal. It's just, well, this is just normal. And this is the action of a friend. This is a benign action. And it doesn't raise really seriously any of the ethical questions which are associated with this practice. So, yeah, interesting stuff. Should we just finish quickly with the email of the week, Daniel? And then we'll finish, because we wanted to finish by now, but we haven't, as is normal. So this is from Anna, who's a devoted listener in Switzerland. So massive shout out to Anna and anyone listening in Switzerland.
Hey.
Lovely country. I've been there. I've been to Lake Geneva. Lovely place. Dear Jamie, I listened. So this is responding to last week on Hancock. Dear Jamie, I listened to your thoughts about forgiveness on Tuesday and Hancock in the early hours of this morning. Were you not judging Hancock? It sounded to me as if you were. You said you weren't. When does one judge? Not by opining that what someone did was totally wrong and reprehensible. I will certainly not forget his COVID policy, not mine to forgive. Thanks all three of you for your excellent podcast. Bless, as we say goodbye in Icelandic. Icelandic? So is she an Icelandic person who lives in Switzerland? Maybe. So the issue there, Daniel, if I was to try and sort of to hone in on that, is I was saying it's not my place to judge Hancock, but I was also criticizing what he was saying and by implication criticizing his actions. So I'll just give a brief response and then I'll hear what you have to say. I think I would want to draw a distinction between judging well, saying something or somebody is wrong, and also pointing out the damaging consequences of somebody's actions. I would want to draw a distinction between that and condemning a person and doing it in a kind of self-righteous, condescending way. So when Christ talks about judgment in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, judge not lest you be judged. Now, the word for judgment there is, if I remember right, is krinomai, which is actually a kind of condemnation of a person. And the point I think Christ is making is that if you go around condemning people, then you are liable to be being hypocritical and bringing judgment upon yourself. So generally speaking, what we're told to do by Christ is to focus on our own sin and the things that are wrong with us, and to focus on our own repentance. And then when we do that, we can be a person that's more humble, more godly, and we might be in a position eventually to be able to point out things to other people, as appropriate. But it's quite clearly the case that we need to make judgments, discriminations, analysis of things in everyday life. So we can't just say you're not allowed to ever judge anyone or discriminate between different classes of actions or anything like that. That would be to tell somebody that they can't operate as a human being. So that would be my sort of first foray into that. I don't know what your thoughts are, Daniel.
I think we see that clearly, don't we, in the first three Gospels, that Christ's preaching involves a judgment, certainly against sometimes the crowd, sometimes the apostles, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and so on. That there is clearly a judgment upon them, and his words are particularly strong at times. Yeah. So I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, there's a difference between judging and judgmentalism. If that makes it any better. It's quite clear to me that Christ doesn't want us to go around being ultra critical of other people, thinking ourselves superior to other people, pointing the finger, and being that sort of person, lacking mercy, like the Pharisees, putting burdens on people's backs that are too heavy to bear and everything like that. The emphasis has got to be on personal repentance, on humility, and on being kind and, as you say, merciful and gracious to other people and forgiving other people. Now, I think the other thing that's important here is she says, I will certainly not forget his policy, not mine to forgive. Now, in a sense, that's true, right? Because if you say, well, the COVID policy hurt lots of people, then each of those individual people, to the extent that they were hurt, have something to forgive Hancock, I would say. So I would say, actually, his political actions have hurt me indirectly. They cause me a lot of anxiety and stress and other negative emotions. And I do have to come to a place of forgiveness for him for that reason. I must not have bitterness or hate or anger in my heart towards him, even if it hasn't personally hurt me very much. I still shouldn't have those things in my heart towards Hancock, but I must pray for his soul and for his repentance if he's in continuing sin, which is going to lead him into destruction. And this, one of the things that I found particularly helpful from Maximus Confessor when he, in his one of the church fathers in his 400 chapters on love, is that love looks different for different people. So my love for my wife is different. My love for my children is different because they're at different stages. Your love for somebody who is in sin, it can still take the sin seriously, but what you need to do is you need to pity that person. That's the manifestation of your love in that situation. Pity and prayer for that person's repentance, and that is a form of love. And there's nothing kind of enabling. You're not enabling that person's sin. You're not marginalizing it by approaching it in that way. So that would be my take on that. We should finish, Daniel. It's 6 o'clock. Do you give us a quick blessing or a prayer or something, Daniel? We'll finish off.
Particularly in this season of Lent, we're minded that we're called to carry our cross. So for him who asked this of us, may we also in the call to holiness know that he is never far from us, and that he says that his burden is light, his yoke easy. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with us and remain with us all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. If you enjoyed this show, you can, of course, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/irreverend, for as little as £1.50 plus VAT per month. We do really appreciate everybody who is a Patreon, and we thank you so much. And if you'd like to do that, patreon.com/irreverend. Send us an email, reverendpod@gmail.com. Follow us on Telegram, Twitter, etc., all that kind of stuff. We'll finish there. And we're looking forward to being with you again next time. Thank you very much.